Great. So welcome everyone. Welcome to our accessory dwelling unit webinar, ADUs. Learn how to generate revenue from unused space and ease the housing crisis while doing it. There's been a lot of changes with the ADU laws, and we're going to go through that today. And it creates a lot of opportunities for homeowners and apartment building owners to really maximize their space that they already own, either for rental income or for additional flexibility, for family needs or whatever. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my esteemed panelist, Sarah Ebner. She's the founder and owner of C Architecture. My name is Michael Minson. I'm the founder and owner of Level Up Group. We're a real estate team here in the city. So Sarah, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Michael. So hey, everyone. So to get us started, I thought we could just quickly define an ADU because it's one of those nebulous terms. An ADU, in short, is a smaller independent residential dwelling unit located on the same property as a single family home. It can take on many forms, which we'll cover today, either detached or attached, and it can be a kind of a range of size. One little note here is that approximately 10% of US housing stock has some sort of informal ADU. This is illegal, non-conforming, something casual that you just kind of use for your family. So it does, all of this is relevant to a number of us. So really quickly, some of the kind of numbers around an ADU is that it needs to hit a minimum square footage of 150, which is a pretty small unit. Tiny houses in some jurisdictions apply to this and can serve as ADUs. Attached accessory dwelling units do have an opportunity to be larger, up to 1,000 square feet, depending on the number of bedrooms you're providing. And detached ADUs can extend all the way up to 1,200 square feet. Setback requirements that are applicable to your property aren't necessarily required for the ADU, and ADUs typically can sit within 4 feet of a property line setback. So that's kind of a bonus if you're looking to maximize a detached unit or an addition. And then finally, there are some height restrictions on ADUs. 16 feet is usually what most jurisdictions require. And I guess a helpful point here is that they do need to be reserved for rentals greater than 30 days, right? So we can't have any short-term vacation rentals here in our ADUs. So quickly covering some of the forms ADUs can take, starting with the baby. A junior ADU is kind of an exceptional type of ADU. It is a compact unit that sits within the existing footprint of your home. It has a maximum allowable square footage of 500 feet. And at some point, whether it's within the JADU or the main family residence, the owner needs to be living there full time. So that is a big distinction between a junior ADU and a typical ADU. It needs to include some typical conveniences like an efficiency kitchen, and the bathroom could actually be shared with the main residence. So this is intended to be kind of a, shared for what have you, family visiting. It could be a partial rental unit to students. It could be a good fit for in-home care. So if you do have someone living and helping you out, we typically see junior ADUs, introduced for those reasons. Next, there's the detached construction. These can take on a couple of different forms. Tiny homes, we call them granny flats or guest houses. Some folks call them cottages. In any case, this is a small structure independent of your home that sits usually within your backyard, hidden from the front road or the front facade of the house in the street.
I think we're going to look at one in a little bit. It actually sits in the front yard. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I'll break my own rule on typical, and we'll present one that's kind of an exception to the rule, and it's an interesting, very, very, very rare kind of case that you see those, but definitely possible. One of the most popular types of ADUs we see are garage conversions. These ones are usually converted garage spaces, obviously, but can also include additions to the garage. So vertical additions or rear additions are common to see. So if you did want to maximize the square footage and your garage happened to just be a single family or single car garage, you can always expand and convert the garage and add to it in at the same time. So that's another consideration. And then the basement conversion. So for a few of you who have basements here or interested in introducing them in some capacity, basement ADUs are a possibility. The one thing to consider with those is that they do need separate entrance. So accessing the basement isn't always automatic or easy to do if it's an existing condition and only accessed from your main home. So that's one important point there. So a little bit about legalizing. I think there were a number of folks that wrote in interested in hearing some information on legalizing existing in-laws, and many of the existing in-laws that are out there are not legal or conforming. The California law that was passed as of January this year offers Californians an opportunity to legalize their units with no penalties or fines for the next 5 years. It's a really great initiative that the state's taking to try to introduce more housing and encourage folks to kind of get up and legalize what's there, what's been sitting there on their lots for a little while. So that's one thing to take advantage of. And I see a question popped up. We'll try to get to that at the end if that makes sense. We'll just keep rolling here. The process involved in legalizing your existing non-conforming ADU will typically look like this. The first step I always recommend is to engage a licensed professional or someone in the building industry who is an expert in ADUs. They can visit your site, survey the conditions, understand kind of the extent of the illegal nature of the structure and the layout and what's going on basically on site. The second step, whether it's yourself or a professional you engage, would be to reach out to the local jurisdiction and just understand more carefully what the process is that you would have to go through to legalize your unit. We always suggest getting well acquainted with that before starting any design work or legalizing work itself. The following step would be to develop your permit documents. So the local jurisdiction will need to see documentation of what you intend to build or what it is you're looking to have legalized. And they will issue you a permit to do that before you start construction. And then finally, you may think, well, all I have to do is document it, but most often we see illegal ADUs requiring some sort of construction to meet current code requirements. So that's something to consider if you are legalizing. And that's another good reason to always consult with someone before you get started down this path to understand what likely work you're going to have to take on.
Sarah, one things that we see in a lot of homes in San Francisco, Bay Area in general, a lot in San Francisco, is an in-law that's got a low ceiling height. Are there any exceptions for that?
Unfortunately, no. Ceiling height, there are some code exceptions where, 7 feet is the minimum. 6'8" is an exception for projections, but there really isn't anything baked into the code that exempts ADUs from those basic living space requirements. And the same goes for access to natural light and ventilation. Those requirements are consistent with the residential building code.
Darn
it. We get a lot of those. A lot of people do lower their foundations though, and it's within the realm of possibility to get that extra couple inches. So really quickly, we covered a lot of these. Reiterated here are just the characteristics of the ADU. A few important things to highlight here that don't necessarily overlap with what we've already presented was they cannot be sold separately. So an ADU, once it is constructed, is going to be a portion of your property that is inseparable from it. So it's really not intended to become a condominium or anything like that. The ADU has to be a minimum of 50%. Or maximum of 50% the existing single family homes area. So, if you're thinking, oh, well, my home is only 1,200 square feet and an ADU could be 800, well, you might be up against the square footage of your home and having to respect that 50% rule. Yeah, otherwise, it's obviously a fully contained living unit, so it does need a full kitchen, bath, and sleeping quarters. With that in mind, we see a lot of efficiency ADUs, so studio type layouts where there aren't necessarily dedicated bedrooms, and that works totally fine. It does need a separate entrance, whether it's attached, detached, basement, what have you. Every ADU needs a separate entrance from the street or the public right of way. So that's something that oftentimes if we have, a compact city lot and we've got our home in front from, side property line to side property line, separate entrances are difficult to come by. And so that's something to consider when looking at your own property. And I think the rest. Does everyone still hear me? I'm getting a notice on Zoom. It's magic.
Yeah, you faded out for a second there, but you're back.
Okay, perfect. Great. So really quickly, a little bit of background on the laws. So as of January 1st of 2020, laws were passed in California to make ADUs much easier to build and quicker to approve. So there are a couple details that are relevant to property owners looking or considering their ADUs. One is the permit timeline. It's been cut from, I think it was 120 days to 60 days. Or it could have even been 190 days. In any case, it's significantly shortened, and a 2-month permit process, if anyone in the audience here has permitted anything, is quite fast, faster than you'll see for almost any kind of work these days. There are changes to the laws in that you don't need to be occupying your own property with an ADU included on it, with the exception of junior ADUs. So that's been a big change. And if HOAs are applicable to your property, there's no longer a requirement or there is a requirement for them to approve ADU construction. So they really don't have a right to delay or refuse that work. And then, as we covered already, the cities, they've granted a grace period of 5 years to have those illegal ADUs permitted and legalized. And some important points of automatic approval. So things that are exempt from even the 60-day turnaround and would just sit kind of in the fast track for building permits are ADUs that are converting existing space. So think of a garage or anything within the existing footprint of a home. So no additions included in this, but generally just simple conversions. And then detached ADUs that are a maximum of 800 square feet and sit within that 16-foot height limit.
So what does automatic approval mean? Does that mean you can just, you submit it and they can't deny you, or can they fiddle with it?
Yeah, so how most jurisdictions work are the planning department will review any sort of application that involves exterior work to a house, whether it's an addition or changes in entries, things like that. With an automatic approval, you can skip that process, and it's typically the planning department review that takes the longest. Oftentimes, neighbors are involved, things like that. So it allows you to fast track just to building review.
Oh, so you skip the neighborhood 311 process, is that right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That's huge.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah, it is.
That's a good reason to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Great. And this is the California laws. They came out on January 1st. I think it was a whole package of them, maybe 4 or 5, I believe. And that's really what triggered us to start talking about this. It's a fairly big change from what we had before. Is that right, Sarah?
Yeah, it's a dramatic shift. ADUs have always been encouraged, but I think as of the 2020 law change, they've never really been incentivized, I'll say. So this law is a huge shift towards the state trying to solve the housing crisis and offer more affordable small units to help ease that demand. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I'll just take a couple slides here too. Thanks, Sarah. And really speak about what are the benefits of ADUs? Why do people get them? I really like this infographic because it really speaks to multi-generational needs. So sometimes you need income. An ADU is a great source of income. Sometimes you need expansion, whether you've got an extended family, an au pair, teenagers are growing up, college students moving back. having that extra space is very helpful for more than just income. And it also gives you flexibility. So, and as your needs evolve, that space can change. In the infographic, we've got a family living in the big house and they're renting out the ADU. And as the kids get older, the kids and the parents, everybody lives in both units, need more space. And then as the kids leave, you got empty nesters. Maybe mom and dad don't need that big 3,000 or 2,000 square foot house anymore. Maybe living in the 300 to 500 square foot ADU makes more sense, and they can supplement their income by renting out the big house. So that flexibility is really, really long-term valuable, more so than just for resale purposes. And of course, renting out an illegal in-law comes with some risks, risks of being caught by the city and fined. And probably the bigger risk, or a just as big a risk, is the tenant figures out that they're living in an illegal in-law and they decide to stop paying you. And you have very few enforcement mechanisms to collect the rent. So getting on that sure ground is a big step forward. So economics of ADUs, we get asked this a lot. How much will my property value increase if we add an ADU? And I'll just caveat this from the outset that it's hard to be precise with this. I looked up all of the sales that had ADU in them in the past year, and filtering out all of the noise and all of the ones that said ADU potential, there were only maybe a dozen or so sales in the past since this law has changed that have happened in San Francisco. So take this with a grain of salt. Ballpark wise, ADUs are pricing out at the same value as the full legal residence. So that's a big deal. If you've got a property that's $1,000 a foot and you add another 100 or 200,000, 100 or 200 square foot unit on the back, you can make an argument that your property value's gone up $100 or $200,000. So adding legal square footage to your home is the single greatest way to increase the value of the property. More so than a remodel, an expansion of the space, square footage is probably the biggest determinant of value. And even converting unpermitted space into legal space increases the value. Keep in mind that unpermitted space isn't zero, right? It has a value. Generally speaking, we value it at about half price, more or less, as a starting place. So if you legalize that space, you've now added another 50% to that value of that space. So let's just use an example here. Noe Valley, for example, roughly $1,200 a foot. If you add a 500 square foot detached ADU to your Noe Valley single family home, you could increase the value by about 600 grand. You have that same 500 square foot ADU that was illegal and you make it legal, you could increase that value by about 300 square feet. So a lot of it comes down to quality and condition and how the layout and all those things and buyer demand, but you've got the square footage, it's valuable, you can use it for all sorts of things. It provides a lot of flexibility, especially in the pandemic period where a work from home space was highly coveted. It's a really good investment. Sarah and I were talking about cost for remodel. Everybody wants to know how much is it going to cost to build this. That's a tough thing to answer in the abstract. But as a rule of thumb, we can generally assume that remodels are costing anywhere from $150 to $300 a foot. A new construction is about $650 to $1,000 a foot. So it can save a little bit if you're buying a modular property or prefabricated or something like that. And these are what rents are going for as of April. So this is from Zumper. A studio is almost $2,000 a month. One bedroom's $2,600, two bedrooms, $3,500, almost $3,600. Rents, just anecdotally, rents have started to go up a little bit. They've been fairly flat for the past 3 months. They're starting to inch up a bit. I think studio, one bedrooms, or the two bedroom jumped up $80 since last month, and the one bedroom, I think maybe $50. So we're nowhere near where we were before the pandemic, but where rents are starting to rise. So landlords out there should find some comfort in that. And renters out there should lock in your rent now because it's a good deal. So financing, I want to thank my husband, Philip Cannon, who's a mortgage broker. He shared a lot of this with me. I am not a mortgage broker. I'm not claiming to be a mortgage broker, and don't take this as mortgage advice. But to build an ADU, there are resources to get the capital. If you have equity in your property, you can do a cash out refinance or a home equity line, of course. But then there are some considerations when you go to refinance the property after the ADU has been built, or you go to sell it and then the buyer has some considerations. And so these are things that I wasn't aware of until we spoke the other day. So Freddie Mac has a guideline that says that they will not lend on a single family home that has more than one ADU. So that's something to consider. Fannie Mae will not lend on a 2 to 4 unit building that has any ADUs. So adding an ADU is legal. And as long as you go through the process, it's a permitted, designated structure that the city is 100% okay with as long as you comply. However, the lending world hasn't quite caught up to that local jurisdiction by jurisdiction changes that are happening, not just in the Bay Area, but all across the country. So I'm anticipating this will change and that they will become more prevalent across the major lending options like Fannie and Freddie. Those are the lender, that's the financial support behind the big banks, Wells and Bank of America and all those guys. But there's a lot of portfolio lenders that can do this. So don't be alarmed that you're never going to get a loan if you try to buy a property with an ADU. That's not the case at all. You might have to do some maneuvering to find out what your options are. And so be sure to check with your lender before you build or before you sell, just so you're fully aware of what's going on out there. And like I said before, these guidelines will almost certainly evolve over the next months and years. Sarah, why don't you talk to us about the process for converting an ADU?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the process is kind of similar across all ADU ranges. It really starts with just determining if your property is a good fit to house an ADU or to accommodate an ADU. So typically the best fit is one with a large garage or a space that's ready and waiting to be converted, whether that's a rec room or a detached garage. Anything can kind of work. As long as we're not making changes to the footprint, those tend to be the most straightforward types of ADU conversions or creations. I would say the second easiest would be the existing in-law, whether it's a non-conforming space, provided it's not, so illegal we can't do much with it, and that's very rare an instance, I would say. Or you have like that bonus room in your home with a separate access to outdoors, something that we can easily add an entrance to and simply convert. Detached ADUs, one thing we do like to see is an easy way to introduce those is a large yard or a somewhat suburban lot. We do a lot of detached ADUs down on the peninsula. It's a bit more difficult in San Francisco due to setbacks and densities, but we do also see, in the 100-foot deep lots with a narrow or a narrow enough structure that's there existing, there is room to consider detached ADUs there. Finally, it's not impossible, but it's not always the most straightforward to introduce an ADU into a basement condition. Separate entry is usually the most difficult to accommodate, followed by structural changes. So if we are punching holes in the structure, adding access to our lower level from the exterior, it usually involves foundation upgrades. So that's something to consider in the cost of introducing those. The second step would be to just be clear on your objectives and intentions. What is the reason you're introducing this ADU? Is it for income? Is it for family or flexibility? And this is something that I'd encourage you to talk with your realtor on, and someone like Michael could provide a lot of advice. Finally, or getting to finally, hiring an architect or a contractor familiar with ADUs to help you ease into the process of actually pursuing the project is a huge first step to take towards that realization of the ADU. They will help you obtain permits, develop documentation. Oftentimes as an architect, I'll also help and revisit step one, the feasibility. So making sure what you were assuming or you've done research on tracks true to your property. And then obviously once permits are approved, construction's ready to start. And oftentimes ADUs don't require you to move out or vacate your property during construction because they are isolated or sometimes detached. There are options to go the prefab route, and there are a lot of ADU companies emerging that offer the kind of kit of parts or the modular construction that's kind of a ship and done process. So those are options as well, and help fast track the construction process usually. And once it's there, profit, enjoy it. You've got that extra space, which everyone who has one just kind of wonders how they lived without it, at least in our clients that we talk to. So.
And we actually started talking, we were networking together, and you were telling me about some of the ADU projects you were doing and how it's actually a very large percentage of your business. Is that right?
It is, yeah. A lot of architects and a lot of contractors have made it. We, as a small design studio in the residential realm, the huge attraction for us is it's usually single family homeowners that we're working with, and we love to work carefully and closely with our clients. So that scale of work really allows us to do that, have that relationship, and easing the housing crisis. We are we like to think of ourselves as a community-minded kind of practice, and ADUs really are helping, I think, improve the situation we're facing here in the Bay Area. So definitely a huge part of our of what we do. So considerations, if you're thinking of the ADU, what are some of the considerations you should keep in mind in those early days, deciding if it's a good fit? They're intended to ease this housing crisis. So that's a huge bonus for yourself and for your community to keep that in mind and consider the advantages of. If you were hoping to rent it out for profit and as a vacation rental or an Airbnb, that is not an option with ADUs, and it's highly regulated to avoid, rentals less than 30 days. So this would not be a good fit for you in that case. They cannot be sold separately. They cannot be converted into a condominium. Once you've built an ADU, it will likely be required to maintain itself as an ADU perpetually. So, if you do use your garage space to convert to an ADU and then discover, in 15 years, you really want to house those cool vintage cars somewhere, that's not something that can be reconverted back to parking. So keep that in mind. It is a pretty permanent decision once you make it. And then finally, ADUs are rent controlled and eviction protected. And oftentimes we'll see the main homes kind of converting to those requirements as well. So that's a pretty big consideration if you're thinking about using them as rental income.
And that's because now that you have the rent board and the planning department don't always see properties through the same lens. And so if you've got two housing units, no matter if they're ADU or full house or condo or whatever, the rent board would see that as two-unit building. Two-unit buildings are under rent control. And they have eviction protections as well. So something important to consider: if you've got a single family home, it's not rent controlled almost everywhere. But if you build an ADU, then your single family does become rent controlled.
All right, so I'm going to run us through a couple of case studies really quickly, just to kind of introduce some real world scenarios to get everyone kind of thinking. These are all projects we've done here at my firm and are underway in some form among our ADU process. The first one is a large suburban lot in Menlo Park. It's the home of a retired couple who were looking to increase their home and their living situation to be able to accommodate a multi-generational kind of lifestyle. They intend on having their children and their grandchildren kind of live on the property within the coming years. And so they decided they wanted to pursue 2 ADUs on their property, one a detached as well as a junior ADU. They have an existing renter in an existing kind of in-law that was not a legal situation. And so what we did was legalize the junior ADU as well as permit a detached ADU for them. So this is a rendering of the detached ADU. It is permitted and under construction. So they did want to maximize the allowable square footage, and in this case, it was 1,200 square feet, to basically provide themselves with a permanent residence while their children and their children's family could move into the main home. So it's a 2-bedroom unit with its own kind of separate garden spaces. And the existing home is Eichler-esque. It's a mid-century home, and we do a lot of ADUs with historical kind of conversions or preservation requirements involved. And so this one was one that the owners imposed, but that we tried to respect and maintain the aesthetics of the main home in the detached home.
This looks like maybe it's just a rendering, but it looks like it's pretty jammed into that corner. Is it, did you get an exception for the lot line, or is that where?
So we maximize the 4-foot setbacks allowable on both sides, the rear and the side yard. And then they did require an arborist report because there's an oak and a redwood right kind of nestled on either side of the house. And so everything was conforming, and it took full advantage. You know, the client's main wish was to absolutely maximize the potential and keep it in that corner of the lot to reserve, you know, the remaining lot for the rest of the yard for the main house and the ADU. They also have a pool on this property, so there's a lot going on back there.
David had a question earlier about similar to this, it sounds like, but he's got an existing, or he's asking a question about an existing shed that's right on the lot line in 2 sides. It looks like it's really jammed in that corner. Would it be possible to convert a shed that has a pre-existing footprint that is on the lot line, to convert that?
Yeah, unfortunately not. If that shed is currently occupied and being used as an in-law, there might be options to legalize or grandfather in that footprint. But if it's an unconditioned like garden shed right now that you're looking to just convert, anything that requires a lot of building code upgrades, like a conversion of an unconditioned space, would likely trigger a requirement to push that back into the 4-foot setback lines. And that it could be a case by case. So David, depending on which jurisdiction you're in, there might be some wiggle room, but I would err on the side of caution with that one and probably say unlikely.
He's in Oakland. Does that change anything?
I don't think so, but if you want to shoot me an email, we could even quickly look at, you know, your address and see where that sits within zoning laws.
Our email is going to be at the end of the presentation, David. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah. So on the same property, there was a junior ADU. And so what we did was we took a portion of the existing garage and a portion of their illegal rental unit, combined them, so expanded the area of it while legalizing the illegal unit. So it was kind of a existing to be conforming and get better at the same time project. So we did a lot with that one, and it was submitted after we had approval for the detached ADU, but most jurisdictions allow you to kind of submit both at the same time or plug and play, whichever you might want to do. So there is potential to maximize your property all at the same time if you're interested in that. It was approved within a couple of weeks after submitting. So that just goes to show how quickly these ADUs are processed. I would say that with a word of caution. Not every jurisdiction is that quick all the time, but we were pleasantly surprised that this sat, you know, with the county so well. And then the highlighted portion in orange there on the slide is kind of how that junior ADU is nestled and shares a bathroom with their existing home, and kind of takes over half of their garage. So. Yeah, real quick, final case study of the day, I guess. For those of you located in San Francisco or in a more urban setting, this is a property in Bernal Heights. The clients are a young couple who have 2 new babies. They're a growing family and they just absolutely need more space. They're in a 2.5 bedroom, I'll call it, very, very compact Bernal home. And also, you know, this is they're new home buyers or new homeowners and wanted to maximize, you know, the future potential of the lot. So they really looked to us to push the ADU laws to the maximum here for their property. What we've proposed, and we're in talks with Bernal and the city planning department on, is a 2-story ADU, which is an addition above their garage. We did not extend the footprint except for maximizing the front setback line and introduce some bay windows, which was something that San Francisco residential design guidelines encourages. It's a monster of a house, and it looks really big in this rendering because it's such a small property. But in this case, it does check the boxes for an ADU garage conversion, in the sense that we're adding up and we're converting the garage space. They did maintain parking on the ground floor, and we kept that for them, and just use some of the garage space as separate access to the upper floors for the ADU itself. There's 1,000 square feet here. It's a 2-bedroom compact unit with a full kitchen and 2 baths, actually. So very, very compact city.
This one really blew my mind, really opened my eyes to what is possible with an ADU. This looks like a house to me, not an ADU. And the fact that it's like we talked about in the beginning, the exception to the rule where most ADUs are behind the house. This one, because San Francisco and Bernal Heights is Bernal Heights, this one's actually in front of the house. So I thought this was a really great example of thinking out of the box of what's possible with an ADU.
Mm-hmm.
And so this still has to go through, Greg has a question about the neighborhood design review process. Is it exempt, or because of the way it's built, it's not exempt from the neighborhood review process?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. And believe it or not, the city of San Francisco isn't sure of the answer themselves. So we are working carefully with planners and with the Bernal Heights Special Use District and their community development or review, I guess their residential review committee, to figure out exactly what process this needs to come into. It's kind of the guinea pig in establishing how closely San Francisco is abiding by the state laws and what that process looks like. This property had 3 options to it, and I think I have a flow chart in a couple of slides, but those options were either state ADU, city ADU, or an addition alteration that had nothing to do with an ADU. And the city attorney is actually reviewing this one to give us feedback on what the fastest process would be. ADUs tend to be exempt from design review requirements, and so we're hoping that'll be the case. And if not, it'll almost be treated as a new construction project and subject to all of those requirements.
It's a beautiful building.
Yeah, so real quick, just on the approach, if anyone was curious on, what this project looked like from start to finish, we took it from clients and designed it from the ground up, essentially. Of course, researching all of the applicable zoning regulations and also reaching out to Bernal and to San Francisco planning pretty much at day one to figure out like how much can we build and what's a responsible way to approach the process behind permitting. And then we submitted it formally for permit approval. And it's going through its due process and sitting at planning right now. Yeah, and I won't go too much into this, but this does represent, and it's pulled from the San Francisco ADU handout, kind of their typical permitting review. Unfortunately, most cities, San Francisco included, have not fully adopted the state laws that were introduced in January 2020. They're just a little to legislate it into their municipal codes. So we oftentimes, if we are trying to push the boundary on ADUs, we'll be there at the forefront working with them and their attorneys to figure out, how state law translates to municipal law and getting those updates kind of done real time. Generally, this project and projects like it that are pretty significant ground up or addition projects will take at least 20 months. The ADU approval process should not take more than 2 months, but there's design and construction time on either side of that. So something to consider is timing as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of all I had.
We did have a question from Hugh. It's kind of an undue question. And it's about if the home has an existing in-law and you were hoping to take out the kitchen without a permit, I'm assuming the kitchen didn't have a permit to begin with, Hugh, is that right? And they want to turn that in-law into a master bedroom. Is that something that's impossible to do, or are you allowed to take out an illegal unit and turn it into regular living space, or does it have to be legalized?
That's a very good question. I don't know the answer to that one without talking to you, understanding your situation, and talking with the jurisdiction you're in. I would err on the side of basically it's possible, and the units themselves, if they're not legal and on record as an additional unit, oftentimes what we'll do is document the existing conditions quite carefully. And as a licensed professional, what we document sticks with the city, and that becomes record or recorded into the property's history. If there is no record of an extra unit there, and it's basically just an illegal kitchen, I would say, then I would expect it could be removed and converted into master bedroom space as the addition is legalized itself. And we would call it like an illegal addition that you're looking to kind of retroactively permit in that case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Anybody else has any other questions, please post it in the chat. Sarah, what kind of ADUs do you specialize in? Or what kind of construction projects do you specialize in, rather?
Yeah, so I mean, our ADU experience spreads the gamut of all the types we've kind of talked about today. We have yet to do any tiny home or prefab ADUs, typically because those are outsourced to the companies that fabricate those units themselves. We do a little bit of modular and kit of parts work as well. I would say our typical experience tends to be conversions and addition alterations, and those are usually the most common types that we see. Detached ADUs, we've done a few of them and they're generally very straightforward. But the conversions and the things that require a little bit more Tetrising and smoothing out with either the existing aesthetic of the home or just how things are laid out or structurally managed tend to be when we get the most calls for help. So.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned prefab modular homes. Are there some big names that Jenny is curious? Who should she reach out to for that kind of help, or is that something that you can help with?
Yeah, it's always something we're willing to help with. If someone's looking to understand the feasibility of their lot in general, I suggest calling someone like me or an architect who understands local zoning code and is able to kind of handhold a little bit in the early stages of decision making. From there, we would usually, if you were interested in prefab, after doing a zoning workup of your property, then we would probably just encourage you to work directly with a prefab company. Typically, they offer like their kind of process, and it's a lot less boutique and a lot less, I guess, like careful in terms of like the communication and the design and the customization than ours is. But most of the times, if prefab is an option for you, that's, the reasons are because it's efficient and because it's, a simple process. Companies that come to mind, I have a few that are brand new, and I haven't worked with any directly. So I can always, if you shoot me an email, follow up with a list of a couple to get in touch with. Some are in startup mode even, so I think they're kind of still feeling it out. This is all very new to everybody. But.
Yeah, well, it is new, and it is fairly seismic. And I think as property owners, are always looking for ways to expand, and we're cut through. What's most encouraging about this is it allows us to cut through so much red tape. Working through San Francisco planning, or even Oakland and Berkeley planning, is just an arduous process. Right or wrong, it takes forever. And the nice thing about this ADU process is it allows us to circumvent a lot of that, theoretically and practically speaking as well, and be able to get stuff done, which I think is really helpful. Time is money, and real estate's not getting any cheaper. And so, Sarah, I'm super grateful for you to join us on this webinar. I learned a whole bunch. I think our folks on that joined us, we had 49 people sign up, so that was great. Our contact information is right down here. If you need any help, if you've got an ADU project, or even you're thinking about buying or selling and you're not sure how to value these things, give us a call. Our contact information is here. We're happy to help. Thanks so much, Sarah. Thanks everybody for joining us.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.